Hello everybody, Pascal here from Neutrality Studies, and we've got an update and some new rhetoric from Donald Trump about the war in Ukraine, and I thought this needs to be discussed. So apparently yesterday in New York, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Zelensky and had several discussions with the Ukrainians, and after that he made a post on Truth Social, and after that also there was his speech at the UN General Assembly, and both of them now hint at the new way in which Donald Trump seems to be approaching the US proxy war against Russia. Now, as with most of his announcements, this one too was done on Truth Social, which by now basically has replaced all and any other form of presidential announcements and the White House homepage largely, which really is not a useful thing anymore. But here on Truth Social, which then gets reposted on Twitter, we still get the general direction of where the President of the United States wants to go. Now, this announcement is quite something, so I will read it to you in its entirety first. It starts with, after getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all of the great cities, towns and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all of the other things that are taking place in the war economy, where most of the money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and only getting better, Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO, for NATO, to do what they want to do with them. Good luck to all. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. This statement is wrong on so many levels, and it is bizarre on so many levels that it really takes some unpacking. First of all, the claim that Ukraine can win this war and win back all of its territory and maybe even more. I mean, this is a complete reversal of the previous tune Donald Trump had on trying to convince the Ukraine to that there was some form of territorial concessions will have to be part of any peace negotiation. So it's, of course, it flies in the face of his previous statements and of his approach ever since the meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Now, some people on Twitter are interpreting this as just the latest flip-flopping of Mr. Trump after having heard what the Ukrainians had to say and believing too many of these war lies that we also have been fed for the last 3.5 years. For instance, that Russia is running out of gas. The entire idea with the long lines in front of of gasoline stations is something that also on Twitter has been going around quite a lot, with pictures of cars just standing in line. And apparently this is one of the narratives which, to my best knowledge, has nothing to do with reality. In which universe would Russia still export large parts of its gas and oil while its own people struggle with filling their gas tanks? But please do let me know if you know anything more about this. However, I discard this as one of these blatant war claim lies that is currently floating around in the social media and mainstream media space. But apparently Donald Trump at this point decided, whether he believes it or not, but he decided to use it as a justification for why in the end we are full circle back to the start of this full-scale war. We're full circle back to 2022, when the Western narrative was that Ukraine can win this war. Ukraine can get even Crimea back in its original form, 1991 borders. Everything, all of that is achievable. The Russian army is in very poor shape. The Russian economy is in a horrible shape. The Russian economy will collapse, and the people of Russia will revolt against Vladimir Putin. They will revolt against the people in the Kremlin. We are back there. Donald Trump took us back 3.5 years to where we were at the beginning under Joe Biden. Now, the difference is that Trump here is saying the one thing didn't change. The thing that didn't change is that he's saying that the Europeans need to support Ukraine. So you remember that he was making this point over the last 10 days that if the Europeans really want US help, serious military help, then they need to first put 100% sanctions on India and China, because both of them are still importing Russian oil, and before they don't do that, there will be no further US commitments, and that the US will still supply weapons, but they will not go all in for this for the escalation the way the Europeans would want to have it. And that is, of course, something the Europeans cannot do, and Donald Trump apparently knows that they cannot do it. Hence, he told them, look, this is up to you. And he has been trying now very hard to push this war on the Europeans. And what he makes clear in this post is, again, that the United States is more than happy to sell the Europeans weaponry, and anything the US can spare, anything that Israel doesn't need, can go to the Europeans, which then through NATO can funnel it into Ukraine. But the Europeans need to pay for it, and they need to take the responsibility for anything that comes out of this kind of weapon use. Now, it is highly disingenuous for Donald Trump to pretend that NATO does not include the United States, right? To say that, okay, we will the United States will just supply the weapons and NATO will implement it. NATO is being run by the United States. Politically, it's a club of equals. Theoretically, it's a club of equals. In practice, it is the will of the United States that wins out. And not only that, also militarily, the highest commanders in chief of NATO are always US generals, and we know how far the integration between the United States and NATO on a military level actually goes. We know that the word of the US president is more or less the law of the land. Just remember that it was Donald Trump who pushed for a 5% expenditure target for NATO, and of course he got that target. In relation to the 5%, it also needs to be said that this is the total spending of these countries, and the 5% expenditure on defense, on national defense for the United States, of course, includes also all of its expenses that it has in order to maintain all of its Pacific fleet and its Pacific ambitions and all of its military bases in Japan. Right, all of that flows into those 5% for the United States, whereas for the Europeans, the 5% now means that they need to massively spend more on their defense industries, and the US is more than happy now to squeeze the Europeans off and strip them of their cash, give them US weaponry, anything they can still produce, Although people on Twitter have been very quick in pointing out that the main problem the war has is that the entirety of NATO, including the United States, are actually running out of weapons. The NATO is short of weaponry. NATO is short of shells. NATO is short of air defense systems, which is one of the major issues why this war cannot be escalated the way that the European warmongers would like to have it. Now, in this post here, Donald Trump again basically makes it clear that the Europeans now have to do this war, and they have to execute it, but in the way that the United States deems fine. So to me, this post basically reads like a temper tantrum that even after now 9 months in office, Donald Trump was still not able to achieve this grandiose peace agreement that he wanted, and he's frustrated with all sides, and he basically throws it all on the floor and says like, fine, Ukraine, you want to get back all of your territories the way you had them in 1999. You want to get back everything, including Crimea, maybe even war. Fine, go for it. And you Europeans too, you go for it. Go and do it. And you can have US weapons. We will supply you with weapons. Go for it. And we will funnel them through NATO. Just give us your goddamn money, and then you can have our weapons. We, the United States, don't want more to do with it than that. But at the same time, we, the United States, are not willing to do what we could do in order to wind this war down, which is to put our pressure on Ukraine in order to agree to and the Europeans to actually negotiate with the Russians the way it should be done. So I think overall it still makes sense if you look at the trajectory of what the Trump administration has been saying over time, what it wants to do, and it makes sense in the way that the US now wants to focus on different theaters. It wants to have time to care maybe about Venezuela, about the Caribbean, about South America. It maybe wants time for a war with Iran, because all of the analysts I've been talking to recently all say that the 12-day war really was only the first volley in what's going to be a long and drawn out war. And maybe that's it. Maybe the United States now decided that it's if it cannot wind down the war, then it's going to benefit from it as much as it can. The way that he phrased the final sentence is also indicative of that. Good luck to all. As in, like, Russia, if you can win the war, go win the war. Ukraine, if you can get everything back, go get it back. You can have our weapons. If you really want them, we'll give them to you, whatever we can spare. And then you go and you fight it out, and you bleed each other to death. And as a piece of leverage, the United States will not withdraw its support for Ukraine, because this is leverage toward the Russians. So it's a very duplicitous game, and it's a very nefarious game, but it is actually, in terms of strategy and bargaining, it makes sense for the United States, because why would the US withdraw more support, the support that it has been giving to Ukraine, if in the future this might come in handy for negotiations with Russia? I mean, one thing the US has by now achieved is that it did rekindle the relationship with Russia, and it opened negotiation channels with Russia, and it has bilateral negotiation channels. And the one thing the Alaska meeting also made clear is that there is a way for the top level of Washington and Moscow to negotiate and maybe even work on cooperative projects while this war is still going on. So it seems to me that Donald Trump, instead of trying further to put pressure on different sides to wind down the war, now has decided, okay, then let's let the war continue, and we will not give up any of our strong hands. The Russians won't give up theirs, so why would we do that on our side? If we put that into the context of what Donald Trump also announced, and of which I haven't seen a retraction yet, which is that the security cooperation with the Baltic states, the direct neighbors, will be curtailed somewhat. and that the military bases in Finland that were negotiated and agreed between Finland and the United States, that those bases are not going to be staffed with Americans. I mean, the Americans now, the U.S. has the right to use 15 military bases in Finland, but except for one, they haven't acted on that yet. They haven't they didn't start sending people in to actually take control and ship in U.S. military goods and maybe even who knows what, missile systems and so on. So the U.S., in my view, has so far stopped with the escalation part of this war and the war dynamic, the proxy war dynamic. The U.S. There was talk about the U.S. trying to bring of Trump trying to diminish or bring the war under control and maybe even end it. But now that it seems that that all sides have hit a negotiation dead end because the Europeans are not willing to agree to the American proposal of how to then negotiate with the Russians, and the Russians are not willing to give a ceasefire during the negotiations, and the Ukrainians are not willing to even consider the negotiations about territorial concessions. It seems to me that this post, and the other thing I'll show you in a second, indicate the U.S. is just now going to be fine with the status quo of a confined conflict inside Ukraine, and if hand it over to the Europeans so that they continue doing the pressure that they want to do anyhow with the U.S. weapons the U.S. can spare, and let the bloodletting continue while the U.S. then gets to refocus its military power and its attention on the other theaters. Now, Trump has no intention apparently to take back some of the rhetoric he's already been giving out. The second indication we are getting is this speech that he gave at the United Nations, where he again said that the primary funders of the war need to be punished, namely Beijing and New Delhi, India and China. Of course, it is highly disingenuous to berate China and India for fueling the war, while just a few minutes earlier posting on Truth Social that you will continue selling weapons to NATO, which then give it to Ukraine in order to continue the war. I mean, the hypocrisy is again incredible, but that's what it is. It's just what it is. I mean, I think Donald Trump doesn't even try to hide the hypocrisy. To him, it's more like, this is what I can do. Try to stop me if you can, and if not, then don't even show up in front of my face, right? So the pressure, the diplomatic pressure on India and China will also be kept up to stop buying Russian oil. Trump literally said China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil, and that they are funding the war against themselves by buying energy from Russia while fighting Russia at the same time. He said that about the Europeans. That said, like, the Europeans need to start as soon as possible to stop buying any oil that originates in any shape or form from Russia, meaning, of course, European imports via India, right? Refined oil from Russia. And that he still expects and demands that the US allies then put sanctions on India and China as well. So the rhetoric of escalation, not the rhetoric of escalation, but the rhetoric of maximum pressure or peace through strength, whatever you want to call it, of this duplicitous, hypocritic nature is continuing, right? The U.S., Donald Trump, again, is thinking completely in terms of negotiation strategy and bargaining chips, and how much he can push like a bully everybody else until somebody breaks, and he's doing that continuously, while at the same time in this post now telling us that ideologically, whatever they want. So he's happy now to dump the war completely on the Europeans, as long as they keep paying for it and as long as they don't screw up his negotiation tactics and his bargaining chips. And fine, if the Ukrainians want to hear that some fairy tales about getting back Crimea and maybe in the future even invading Russia, fine, okay, if that's what keeps you fighting and fighting is what you want, then let's do that. So this is of course a sad development. We were all hoping that Donald Trump would actually work together with the Russians and maybe the Indian, maybe the Chinese, in order to wind down this bloodletting. Whether or not this now indicates that he is giving up, or whether this is just his latest strategy in order to kind of put pressure maybe again on Russia to concede to something, we will only know in the future. But it indicates to me, again, together with the fact that we have reports about the U.S. trying to withhold certain military aid to Russian border states, it indicates that Trump is now playing for a managed conflict, a simmering war inside Ukraine, because that seems to be the next best outcome for him to secure his interests in the future and not giving up his bargaining chips, right? So instead of winding the war down, we're not going to freeze it, because the war will continue. And I'm pretty certain that after the talks in Alaska, Trump also has an idea of the capabilities of Russia. But at the same time, okay, fine, let's trash talk the Russians, and then they have to do it on the battlefield. So as sad as it is, but this seems Trump's way of telling the Russians, you want Ukraine, and you told me you have diplomatic ways of doing it and military ways of doing it. Fine, diplomacy is not going to get you what you want. So go and take it militarily if you can. But it's not going to be a free meal. This is the opposite, of course, of peace peace politics, of peace diplomacy. It is a very brutal and very horrendous way of then telling the other side that the proxy war that you yourself started needs to be finished by them off on the battlefield. It's actually in line with previous US proxy wars. It's in line with the way then also the Vietnam War ended, right? It was North Vietnam that in the end had to storm South Vietnam and take them militarily. It was in Afghanistan the Taliban that had to throw out the Americans by just resisting for 20 years and by fighting back. I mean, the United States doesn't usually admit failure until decades after the fact, and also then only through very brilliant historians and sometimes opposition parties that just want to score cheap points with their electorate. Now, this is where we are. I would hope that Trump would at least still rhetorically stick to trying to wind down the war, but it seems the longer this goes on, the more it seems that Brian Beletic is absolutely right in the assessment that he put out more than half a year ago, of saying that this is just the latest version of continuity of agenda, and the United States just reloading and refocusing, but overall now implementing the burden sharing, the division of labor, as Brian Beletic correctly calls it, the way also the term that was used by Rand Corporation reports, division of labor, to dump the Ukraine war, but dump it on the Europeans, but continue it, while the United States then focuses on its imperial strategies in the other theaters, most likely, again, West Asia with Iran, or maybe even Venezuela. God forbid the Pacific, or something with Taiwan. But we are now probably in a transition phase where the US transitions into its next war endeavor. We'll see what comes next. Thank you very much for your attention.